It's very, very important to base your payment structures on milestones, not dates. I've seen people
Yeah.
put it on dates, and contractors are doing that because it matches their payroll or that stuff
Hmm.
like that. But that doesn't help you any. That really just gets you into potential problems.
What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here, and we're back with John from Blackjack Contracting. Hey, John, how's it going?
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me back.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to chatting today about, payment structures, price structures, all that stuff when we're looking at starting a contracting project. I guess I might just preface this right now with it's kind of a hard time to get a contractor these days, right? They're very in demand. It seems like everyone's understaffed. And so I do hear, stories, sometimes horror stories from investors that they kind of feel panicked. They didn't plan in advance. And all of a sudden there's like, yeah, here, I'll just give you 50 or 75% down and let's get this started because we're already 2 weeks behind. I'm guessing that
That's right.
that's probably not the right way to start off the relationship with a contractor.
It's a terrible idea. You know what? This one I've seen burn good people. It's a scary, scary proposition. I don't think some of it is done facetiously. I think some is
Mm-hmm.
done out of desperation, and
Yeah.
but it doesn't matter either way. Like when you're talking about deposits, you'll see a lot of contractors what 50%. So I'm okay with a 50% deposit on a $10,000 job or less.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, it doesn't make any sense to me. Now in California, there's actually a law that you can be no more than 10% of contract value. And
Mm.
unfortunately, there's no such law here, but we run the same principle. It's very, very important to base your payment structures on milestones, not dates. I've seen people
Yeah.
put it on dates, and contractors are doing that because it matches their payroll or that stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. But that doesn't help you any. That really just gets you into potential problems. Pay what As a contractor and someone that's not worried about it, I like to schedule the structure around cash flow needs of a project. So for our average basement suite, we use 7 payments. It's a 10% deposit. It's 10% after the demo is complete. It's 20, and then 320s and a 10. Now that matches the cash flow. We have to complete a certain amount of tasks before the next one is due so that that work's getting done before you're paying more money. And that's the way it should be, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be putting too much on the skin in the game. Some people are going to ask you for more, but my question to most people is that okay, contractors are notoriously bad at cash management. So you
Yeah.
give them 25, 30% up front, they just think, oh, I got all this money in the bank, but all those costs are still yet to incur, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where it's going to get them into trouble when we're about, 60, 70% through the project. And all of a sudden they have 90% of the money, but still 50% of the cash flow to outlay and they've spent it. Again, is it facetious? Probably not. Some will be, but most of the
Mm-hmm.
time it's not. It's just poor cash flow management, and that's one of the bigger problems in the contracting industry. That causes probably 50 to higher percent of the failures. So that's why this is an important subject. I get asked about this quite a bit of how you do it because I think people have been burned by this subject before.
Yeah. And
And sorry, go ahead.
yeah, just kind of building upon that, John, what sort of advice or, what should an investor do if they're saying down with the contractor? Maybe everything seemed decent so far throughout the quoting process and all that. And then the contractor's like, all I need is 50% to get started. How do you broach that subject without making it seem like, either you don't have the money or you don't trust them? Any tips or advice on kind of how to navigate those waters?
That's where you're going to have a serious conversation and negotiate that. Now, and you could probably do some sort of insurement of payment. You can, get a line, you can get a letter from the banks, declaring, cash is available or something like that, or do some sort of, I'm not sure, CPA, I don't know if there's a trust account for something like that or not, but, you probably proof of payment is, I think, more than enough going to be enough for the contractor. If they say they need 50% to buy the materials, honestly, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So that's something that if they're not willing to budge on that, now you have to make a decision. I wouldn't be comfortable with it. Like it could be, have the best name in the industry. If it doesn't, if you're not comfortable with the payment structure, I wouldn't get into it. Now you have to be reasonable too.
Mm-hmm.
There's like if someone said they want 20% down and they do, 5 more payments through the project, I would consider it as long as you think it's going to match the cash flow. But that's a tough question, but I think it's a question that I think takes just an open and honest conversation and make sure that you're 100% comfortable with it, or don't sign the contract until you are.
Yeah. Appreciate you sharing that perspective. And then, so let's say things started off well initially on the project, and, we've got a set of milestones in place, and all of a sudden the contractor reaches out asking me to pay in advance before we've hit one of the milestones.
That happens so much you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
You got to stick to your guns, because that money is not just for your project. Trust me. If you know what I mean, that is because something else is going on somewhere else. They have personal problems, or they're having a major cash flow issue in another project. You have to stick, because once they get that money, good luck getting it back. I've seen my fair share of civil court cases and lien processes. It takes years. It does not favor the homeowner. It doesn't favor the contractor either, but it'll cost you almost more money to recoup than that was worth.
Yeah.
So you have to be diligent during the process of the renovation, and stick to the contracts. It's also opens up a whole bunch of other Pandora's boxes if you don't follow the contract, because then all of a sudden, well, we could just do this and this and this. So I highly recommend don't break from that payment schedule.
Yeah. Appreciate that. And I know so many investors make that mistake, and oftentimes it's kind of due to a sense of desperation, right? Like, well, what if I say no? Will he just walk off the job? And again, like, I'd love to get your perspective, but I'll share mine first. If they're going to walk off the job because you won't, bend to new terms based upon no really good reason. Again, obviously we open it up and discover the walls are all terrible and we got to replace things. That's a different situation. But if this is really some sort of cash flow management issue on their end, one, I suspect that this isn't going to be the only time it comes up in the project. And two, if they're going to walk off the job because they're making an unreasonable demand, they're probably going to find a different reason to walk off the job at some point in the future. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
100%. And I witnessed this with an investor recently, and I gave them advice to hold your guns, because once that money is out of their hands, you're screwed and end up working out for them. Most of the time, the contractor is going to find a way to do, because he knows he needs the money. He's got to get to the next thing. But honestly, if it gets to the point where they say either you pay me more money, even if it's way too early, or they don't have the money to work, or walk off, I'd let them walk off, because I still think it's going to be cheaper for you to wait a month, find another contractor, and get it done. You got to remember is that it's not a fair business. It never has been. There's lots of great general contractors. This does not apply to. I just want to make sure I'm not bashing the whole. I love the industry, but unfortunately, there's too many that aren't trustworthy. And if it gets past that thing, all of a sudden they have another big chunk of money. They walk off the job. Good luck getting it back for a long time, or if not things. So you have to be extremely diligent with your process. And that's why it's better to have, a bunch of smaller payments throughout a project. So if it was 10 grand, it's better than sending the guy 40 grand, if you know what I'm saying. So it just happens too many times, as you mentioned before. So you have to stick to your guns.
Yeah. And so one that I've heard personally before, as well as I've heard from other investors, is, we've got this set of milestones, everything's going fine. And then all of a sudden the contractor reaches out and says, hey, this subcontractor is being unreasonable. This sub that's coming in to do a portion of it, they're demanding payment up front, or any thoughts on how to approach that situation? Or could we have maybe avoided it had we had a different contract at the start?
So the general contractor is the only point of contact with that customer, right? That the payment terms that have nothing to do with the subcontractors whatsoever. All our subcontractors have to sign subcontractor agreements, and it's based off that payment schedule that we have set with them. There is a minimum law to this about 37 days. That has to be discussed up front. If the contractor is demanding, this guy's demanding an upfront payment, that should have been part of your cash flow outlay on our project. So ours we charge 20% of the project before the sub trades come in. That's going to cover all that expenses, right? So subcontractors, materials, and labor is not the customer's problem. That's why you hired a general contractor. So if they say your subcontractor needs this, then that comes out of their pocket until they meet their thing. That's just an easy way to get back into the trap we just talked about, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you sharing that. And so I guess any other maybe pitfalls or traps that investors should be careful of when they're, working, like either starting a project with a contractor or maybe mid-project?
If you're doing a project 6 months to a year from now, I don't think you should be giving like a 10% or a 20% deposit. I think there should be maybe $1,000 in a contract signed, and a couple of weeks before the project started, where they actually outlay in cash that you do that.
Yeah.
Say your project's $100,000, you write them a check for 20 grand 6 months from now. How do you know they're going to be in business 6 months from now? Or the guy didn't, God forbid, pass away, or favorite thing. You'll never get that money. You never get that money back. So I would be careful about, like, I have a local residential contractor that takes 50%, and it could be a year from now he still takes 50%. I think that's a terror. Now, don't worry, he's an honest guy, so it works for him, and it works. But I'm saying is, I would never, ever in a million years do that. I would be putting down a small sort of reserve fund and doing that. So I would be careful of that trap right there. One thing I'll give people advice on payment structures is, when that payment is due, pay the contractor. You got a deal, we stick to our deal, you stick to your deal, because really, if you hold off payment or you're late on payment, you're hurting yourself in the timelines, because now the guy doesn't have the cash outlay to buy your stuff or pay the subs. So I guess that's one thing I'd like to mention, is it should go both ways. Watching some of the most successful investors I've ever worked with, they're Johnny on the spot with cash. And you want to earn the loyalty of an average contractor, pay them on time, and they'll be there when they have to choose between two projects. They're going to be at your door first. So that's what one of the things, even real estate agents or influencers in the business have always used that strategy to just pay them when it's due, and it's on time, it's fair, it's in the contract, and you'll get great loyalty out of it. And I guess one thing I'd say is, when that payment is due, that milestone is reached, don't just take words, get a little bit of proof. All our customers get photo logs of our jobs so they can see it's done. But if you don't have that system in place, request pictures or do a site visit if you're local, and make sure that it's actually to the agreement, and then write the check, and then everybody's happy.
Yeah. Appreciate you sharing that. And so one thing we haven't touched upon yet, that I know we've covered in previous videos, but I don't think we should talk about payments and terms without touching upon it, is a holdback. So do you mind touching upon that? Sure.
Holdbacks are more of a commercial thing, but they are legal in Ontario, and I believe it's 10% for 30 days above the completion, after the completion date. I haven't had one customer in all of my days actually activate it. You can. If you're seeing bad problems, you're having major quality of work issues, you're worried about something, then it's not a bad idea because the moment you pay them all their money, if you're dealing with an unreputable guy or an untrustworthy guy, he's gone. We have a 3-year warranty in place, so it doesn't matter. We'll be back, whatever needs fixing, but that doesn't mean you can trust everybody. So the 10% held back is to protect you, to make sure that the property is actually, what we've said it does. It's operating well. So I would personally only use it if it's something you really don't trust that contractor at this point through the process. But I believe the law is 10% for 30 days. Now, commercial is a little bit different, but I think that's the residential law.
Gotcha. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And then, so when we're kind of walking through or checking that final punch list with the contractor, any tips or insights into, if someone, maybe this is their first project or their first big project, what should they be looking for, or what should they maybe look out for when walking through? And again, obviously each project's different, but let's talk about, some of your bread and butter if they're walking through a new basement suite.
Sure. First of all, you want to do is at least a week before it's done. It's not going to be perfect, but you want to do a walkthrough with either a project manager or the contractor, whoever you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be deficiencies. We're not saying we're done, but you want to go see if you see any major ones. You want to write them down, put it on their list, write it down for yourself. That way, when you come for the final, you know what it's good. You want to be testing all the functions. We want to run the water. We want to test the electrical. We want to make sure the furnace is working and it's clean. We want to make sure there's no gaps in the floor. We want to make sure the trim's tight. We want to make sure there's no loose anything. The doors are operating closely. Do your original punch list, 7 days or whatever, during the punch list walkthrough. Write them down. Whoever you're working with should write them down. They'll spend the last week. They'll do all the adjustments and touch-ups, and then you're going to come back and check them. Now, if you don't feel comfortable, or if you're just not very handy or construction type, then maybe it's a good idea to bring a home inspector or bring a close family friend. Now, in saying that, be respectful to the contractor. Don't, have the guy sit there and bark at the contractor. Just have them create a list for you, and then you can discuss it. And everybody respect that. I'll make sure it's a professional, not just some pissed off dad that says you charge me too much money and all that stuff. So that, and all that stuff. So I've never seen that personally, but I can see that working out well. Make sure you get on your closeout. You're going to want to see your closeout permits. Make sure the inspector's happy. Test all the functions. Make sure it's clean, and then you should be good to go. And just make sure that see what the company's warranty process is, and get the paperwork for that so you have proof of it. And then I think you should be laughing.
Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate you sharing that, John, because I know for a lot of people, this is a very intimidating part of the entire real estate process, right? They're excited. They finally closed on the property. They've got this dream set of renovations they want to execute. And then once the machine starts in motion, it sometimes starts to be like, I hope they did things right. I hope it's going to work out. And I've definitely seen that deer in the headlight moment for more than a few first-time investors.
Yeah, and again, it's back to something we talked about a long time ago, vetting that contractor, what experience, but also remember that things go wrong, things change. So you can't give the contractor an unlimited leash, right? They still got to be audited, and they still got to be held responsible. Well, during that project, we are working for you. We answer to you in a obviously a respectful and a productive manner. And then so to make sure that we fulfill what we promised you for the money we promised you, and the dates, and you got to hold them accountable. Unfortunately, this is not a industry with a high level of accountability, and something that you're going to have to hold yourself to, or you're hiring somebody to do. That's generally why you hire a general contractor, is to have somebody with accountability. Or project consulting, you know what I mean? Sometimes you'll hire your own construction manager on builds or something like that. Again, it's all stuff that we wish we wouldn't have to do, but unfortunately the industry mandates it. So that's why it's best to work with a reputable contractor, which means obviously you're going to pay a little bit more. But until you get the experience, it's probably better to work with a little more of expensive a service until you get the skills. And then you could start, as we talked about, get a little bit more managing yourself, or a little bit like that. That's how I would handle it personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of as a little tangent here, that dude on Kijiji that charges $20 an hour, he's not going to give you a contract. He probably won't even know what a punch list is, but it's definitely going to be asking for cash advances and all kinds of forwards as well. And so this is one of those situations where you absolutely get what you paid for when it comes to renovations.
And just back to that whole contract. I mean, I saw a situation with a senior investor, that's like a very, very veteran investor. I had sent a referral for a guy that I met a long time ago that did decent work for me a long time ago. He needed a simple task done in his house, and he just sent them, $1,000 for a door without getting any paperwork and all that stuff, and never heard from him again, right? So you got to understand is Even it doesn't matter how little or how small, get it written down.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice, John. And again, really appreciate you just sharing all your experience and wisdom when it comes to contracting, because this can be such an intimidating process for first-time investors and even those of us with a little bit of experience. So again, if you guys want to reach out to John and Blackjack Contracting, all their contact information is in the video description down below. Really do encourage you guys to reach out to John, because one thing that you'll come to find for some of those investors right now that are maybe DIYers or constantly dealing with Kijiji contractors, your project actually goes a lot smoother and comes in on time and budget when you're actually using a professional. And so it's so important. I see so many people cutting corners at the start of their project, and they end up paying for it in huge lump sums that had they just actually set out with the right person on the right project at the beginning, it would have actually just been smooth and they could move on to the next deal.
Yes, sir. Buy right once or pay twice.
Absolutely. Thanks again, John. And again, guys, contact information in the video description down below.
Thanks, everybody.